Miatta Fahnbulleh, Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, is here. Not quite for a gossip, but for some talk. Although feel free if you wish, it's up to you. Dido Harding was interesting yesterday, wasn't she, talking to a group of MPs and saying, as though it hadn't occurred to her before, that there might need to be more financial support to help people to isolate, because we're reaching a bit of a critical mass. If mass testing is rolled out in a number of areas as well as Liverpool, then a lot of people are going to be isolating.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I thought that was a really significant intervention. And actually, when you look at the figures, so a few weeks ago, Sage came out and said less than 20% of people that were required to were self-isolating, which is a phenomenally low number. And, there will be lots of reasons for that. But one big reason for that is that some people just can't afford to. And this is something that, many people have raised over and over again to the government. They did do a little bit. So they essentially said, if you're self-isolating, you get the equivalent of £250 a week for the 2 weeks. But those that are eligible for it is a tiny number of people. And so, if they are serious about mass testing and about more of us self-isolating, they've got to address that. So I think right to raise it.
It's a good moment to alert you and anyone listening to a story that came to my attention in the last 10 days or so. Somebody I know who needed to isolate is on a very low income, and I said to her, do you know you can get this £250 a week for the 2 weeks? And she said, I do, but it says on the council website that you have to have a bank account, and she didn't have a bank account. And she was going to leave it there and just assume she couldn't get it. But we made a few calls, as they say, and she got what she was owed, which is that 200. It's made a massive difference to her. And, she was isolating anyway. She was doing the right thing. But she was, just by assuming that because of the bank account issue there was no way around it, she would have gone without it, which is, I'm sure that situation is repeated elsewhere. It's good for people to know, isn't it, that if you push and just explain that you need it, and that there'll be other ways of getting it to you.
Completely. And they've also just got to make it available to far more people, because, a lot of people will do the right things. But for some, particularly when it's really tough, it's already tough, and it's going to get a lot tougher for a lot of people. Going out without income or, statutory sick pay if you're lucky enough to have a job for 2 weeks is a big ask.
On the question of being lucky enough to have a job, UK unemployment figures came out, didn't they? And they were constituency by constituency in the way they were rolled out. Interesting to see which areas are worst affected.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we knew this was coming. And actually, in some respects, the surprise of this pandemic has been the fact that we expected unemployed numbers to be much higher than they are. And that's in part because of furlough. And the big uptick that we saw this quarter, the highest recorded number of redundancies in one quarter on record, 314,000, was a function of the fact that a lot of people thought that the government was going to remove the furlough scheme. So lots of redundancies were issued, and we're starting to see that filter through the unemployment numbers. Unfortunately, I suspect that, there were more jobs lost in October that aren't capturing that numbers. So the numbers are going to get much tougher. And for me, the big lesson of it is, firstly, furlough has taught us that the government support is absolutely critical as we try and balance the public health needs for restriction and the economy. But secondly, there are many people who have lost their jobs, and also many people who are falling between the cracks of government support schemes, and they need help.
Well, it was interesting in the House of Commons today during Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister insisting that the government has done something for everyone. That's not strictly true, is it?
It's not true. It really isn't. And, if you talk to those self-employed and others that have been excluded, they will give you very, very moving and painful accounts of how that isn't true. But even where they are providing support through something like universal credit, people are literally living on the breadline. The numbers of people having to rely on food parcel and food banks has massively spiked. And that just can't be right. For me, this has been a blind spot. The row over free school meals is, one facet of it. We do not provide enough income support for people to have the basics to live on. And that's being shown very, very viscerally in this pandemic, and it has to be addressed.
Also, it was part of the picture before the pandemic, wasn't it? People in work benefits and in work poverty.
Completely. So, if you compare our in-work benefits as a proportion of earnings, we are one of the lowest in the OECD countries. The rate at which it is today is lower than it has ever been since the welfare state was created. That was the state of play before we went into the pandemic. And then suddenly we have so many more people who are relying on benefits, relying on universal credit. And they're just like, this is not enough to live on, because it's not enough to live on.
Thank you, Miatta. Always good to talk to you. Miatta Fahnbulleh, Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation.